On March 25, 1911, 146 workers, mostly young immigrant girls, lost their lives in a horrific fire in New York City. This fire was known as one of the deadliest workplace disasters of that time. Trapped inside a sweatshop behind doors that had been locked to keep out union organizers, many of the victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire actually chose to propel themselves 9 stories to their deaths rather than be consumed by furious flames.
Max Blank and Isaac Harris, managers of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory, were not strangers to suspicious factory fires. The Triangle factory was twice scorched in 1902, while their diamond waste company burned twice in 1907 and in 1910. Many believed that Blank and Harris deliberately torched their workplaces before business hours in order to collect on the large fire insurance policies they purchased, a practice not uncommon in the early 20th century. While this was not the cause of the 1911 fire, it contributed to the tragedy, as Blank and Harris refused to install sprinkler systems and take other safety measures in case they needed to burn down their shops again. Obsessed with protecting their financial investments, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, after violating the rights and risking the safety of their workers, they neglected their responsibility of providing their employees with a safe work environment. The employees had a responsibility to go to work on time, sew blouses, make sure they were following directions from the floor manager, and doing their job at all times. Meanwhile, they only received a meager wage of maximum of $15 per week, despite the long hours and unsafe work conditions. Bosses are under such competitive pressure that they're prepared to ignore under most circumstances the grievance of their workers, to treat them like stucco, like animals, like pieces. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City on March 25, 1911, on the 8th floor at approximately 4:45 p.m., 260 women, mostly teenagers, had begun to collect their belongings as it was closing time. It is suspected that someone tossed a match or a cigarette butt into a receptacle full of scraps. Because cotton is more flammable than paper, the result was a raging fire that spread quickly. Attempts were made to control and dispel the fire, but to no avail. The fire spread quickly and furiously to the upper floors. Most of the doors were locked, and those that were not only opened inwards and were effectively held shut by the onrush of workers escaping the fire. The only escape route left for the young women were the fire escapes, which were melted by the heat of the blaze and quickly collapsed. Within 18 minutes, 146 workers were dead.
This great tongue of flame leaps out, and passes by where there's some policeman said, oh, it was just a momentary accident. Then all of a sudden, one passerby said something that looked like a bale of old clothes comes plummeting down from the 8th floor and hits with this thud, which somehow seemed too loud for a bale of clothes, on the sidewalk. And someone said they must be throwing, and it was burning as it fell, they must be throwing out the burning bales of clothes. And then other bodies started to come down. People realized that young girls would go out on the ledge. The flames would be looming up behind them, and they'd jump, of course, to die. Some would try to cling to the ledge with their fingertips, but they couldn't. You have plummeting down to the street scores of burning dead bodies.
Within 20 minutes, some of the girls' charred bodies were lined up along the east side of Green Street. 25 employees flung themselves down the elevator shafts trying to escape the fire. Their bodies rained blood and coins down onto the employees who made it to the elevator cars. 19 bodies were found charred against the locked doors, and 25 bodies were found huddled in a cloakroom. Upon finding that they could not use the doors to escape the fire burning at their clothes, the young immigrant workers had begun to jump one after another to their deaths on the concrete over 100 feet below. Sometimes the girls jumped 3 or 4 at a time. Onlookers watched in horror as body after body fell to the earth. 62 thud deaths. I call them that because the sound and the thought of death came to me each time at the same instant, said United Press reporter William Shepard. Engine Companies 72 and 33 were the first on the scene, and even with the biggest ladder in New York City, they were still unable to reach the upper floors. The ladder stopped between the 6th and 7th floor. To add to the already bleak situation, the water streams from their hoses could only reach the 7th floor. Fire department blankets were ripped after multiple girls tried to jump into the same blanket. Some girls tried to jump to the ladders that could not reach the 9th floor. The fire escape in the rear of the building collapsed and trapped the employees even more. Some of the rescue workers were also injured by the falling bodies.
The city was devastated by this tragedy, and consequently life for the factory workers would be forever changed. Workers received the right to leave as needed, award guaranteed, and be authorized work breaks. Workers also received the guarantee of a safe work environment and to save his or herself in any event such as this tragic fire was another impact on the right for the employees. The Fire Labor Standards Act, also known as FLSA, prescribes standards for wages and overtime pay. The act is administered by the Wage and Hour Division. For non-agricultural operations, it restricts the hours that children under age 16 can work and forbids the employment of children under age 18 in certain jobs that seem too dangerous. For agricultural operations, it prohibits the employment of children under age 16 during school hours and in certain jobs deemed too dangerous. Notifying the managers of any known hazards or unsafe conditions in order to keep others as well as themselves free from harm is a responsibility that all employees must follow. The impact of the rights for the managers is they can make certain rules that the employees have to follow. The managers have more flexibility than their employees, but more responsibility. Keeping all employees safe and to keep all doors unlocked at all times during business hours or when occupied are some of those responsibilities.
The girls behind us were screaming and crying. Several of them, as the flames crept closer, ran into the smoke, and we heard them scream as the flames cut their clothes. One little girl, who worked at the machine opposite me, cried out in Italian, "Goodbye. Goodbye."
This dramatic tragedy sparks a wave of reform, so you begin to get more restrictions and a new conversation about what to do to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening, but it did not stop, of course, that tragedy itself. The factory fire led to the transformation of the labor code and to the adoption of fire safety measures that served as a model to the whole country. It changed American labor union and labor laws. New reform was put into place, ensuring that all doors are unlocked during business hours or while buildings are occupied. With the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, Congress created the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, to assure safe and healthful working conditions for working men and women by setting and enforcing standards and by providing training, outreach, education, and assistance.
Though the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire was a devastating event, the 146 lives lost were not in vain, for the effects of this tragedy would forever change and protect the rights of workers throughout America and establish responsibilities for those that employ them.